Seriously, I am so sorry that you had to see that. I honestly never do that. The very first time that I ever put my feet on the piano, you had to see it. So I apologize about that. But anyway, I think that both you and I knew that sooner or later finger puppets were gonna have to make their appearance, but it did happen awfully soon. But let's just do our best to move past that, shall we? Let's wrap up a couple of things from last episode. First of all, I wanted to say, and I didn't manage to say last time, that Adrian gave Spartacus his name. I brought him into a flute studio class years ago and introduced him as the class mascot and asked if anybody had a name for him. And Adrian instantly said, Spartacus, Spartacus the abacus, like it was destiny, like it was just meant to be. So thank you, Adrian, and just think how many little Spartacuses or Spartaci could be out there now as a result of your brilliance. Second, I was given 4 new topics to add to my long list of topics for these videos privately, so don't be afraid to publicly add comments on this video with topic requests, because then other people can second your request, they can add a comment or like your comment so that I know that it's popular and I can move it up the list. The third thing is that someone asked me when I got to my own 10,000 hours of practice, and the answer is that it depends on if you count music in general or if you only count flute practice, because music in general would have been my early teens. I grew up in a musical family and got there really young. If it's specifically flute practice, that would be my late teens, and it was very helpful for me. I was lucky to get it in so early, but just everybody does the best they can. Get there when you can. It will be helpful no matter when you get there. Now let's go on to this video's topic, which is the 3 Little Devils. I couldn't resist titling this video Michel Debost and the 3 Little Devils, because doesn't it sound like a fairy tale? And don't you agree with me that the world could certainly use more flute fairy tales? So the 3 Little Devils are really all about finger technique, and we do need some basic background on finger technique, general ideas, before we get specifically to the 3 Little Devils. So before we go any further, let me go get something to show you and I'll be right back. This book is called The Simple Flute, and it was written by Michel Debost pretty late in his very long teaching career. This version is in French, but it's very easy to find in English, no problem. The only reason I got it in French actually was that this version was cheaper, so you can easily find it in English. And I highly recommend this book. I use it as a textbook for my graduate flute pedagogy students. And the ideas in this episode of FluteTube can mostly all be found in this book by Michel Debost. I'll put more about Michel Debost and mention this book in the video description so that you're not left wondering who this guy is that I keep talking about all the time. But the main thing to remember as far as basic finger technique is not about the fastest possible fingers. It's not about going superhumanly fast. It's about fingers that we do not hear when you perform. We shouldn't know when we hear you perform that you have fingers. You should sound like a singer, and singers obviously don't worry about fingers, and we don't want to think about your finger technique while we're listening to you. There are some exceptions, extended techniques, maybe a composer has asked for some kind of percussive effect, that kind of thing, or perhaps you've been recorded and the microphone was a little bit extra close and so it's inescapable that we're going to hear a little of finger noise. But generally speaking, we don't want to hear your fingers. And to keep us from knowing that you have fingers, there are a couple of things that you need to do. One is to be sure that they're completely coordinated, so there are no little glitches between different notes that you play. And the other is to be sure that you're not gripping the tube too hard or slapping the keys on the flute as you play. And if you're saying to yourself, I already know this, yet I still do that, I have some tips for you. One of the most important aspects of finger technique for any instrumentalist is to try to have the most natural possible hand position. That makes it efficient and sustainable, and it keeps you from doing damage to your tendons. So for the flute, your right hand is pretty easy actually to be quite natural. If you think of lifting your hand to pinch someone or if you think of grabbing a Kleenex, you just want to use that same position and add your flute to that hand. That means that your thumb is going to be a bit farther back than a lot of flute players think. You'll see a lot of flute players put their thumb really far forward, but what that does is it bends this wrist. You want to keep your wrist completely straight so that your tendons going back are nice and relaxed, and that means your thumb is going to be pretty far back on the tube. The left hand is always going to be a little trickier to deal with because it's just not as natural of a position no matter what you do. But a great trick is to reach up and grab with your left hand your right earlobe, because that puts your hand in a nice natural position. The other thing is it turns your head a little to the left. If you just bring your hand down and add your flute, you'll be in a really great position. And flute players want to turn their head a little bit, because if you don't, if you're facing straight forward and you just put your flute up, you put a lot of pressure on this right shoulder. So you want to swivel a little bit this way, take some pressure off that shoulder, and turn your head a little bit to the left. This gives you nice curved fingers and a really natural hand position if you can maintain it while you play. Another thing that you can do to avoid gripping or slapping while you play is to be sure that you don't just think about the pushing motion. If you're thinking of pushing all the time on your keys, you can really get tight. But if you think that you have to lift your fingers just as often as you push them down, it can relieve tension. Mathematically, for every time you push down, you have to lift up. And if you think of that lifting, releasing motion, that can get rid of a lot of tension. Let me give you one more good way to think about refraining from gripping while you play. If you rest your hand on a hard surface like a table or a piano or something like that, and you just lift your fingers and let them fall, you get a really nice natural hand position. The fingers are curved. That's a great flute position. And what you realize is that if you just lift your fingers and allow them to fall, that's all that's needed. It's really easy to fill on a surface like this. You don't need to push into the surface at all. It's just kind of muscles and gravity that takes care of it. And we don't need to push into flute keys either. Flute keys are very responsive. And the other thing that you can think about with natural hand position and tension is that tension in your body anywhere translates. If your fingers are tense, you're going to breathe in a more tense way. If you're not resting well on your feet, you have tension in your legs, it's going to be hard to take a nice deep breath. So whether you relax your whole body and then as a result your fingers relax, or whether you make yourself relax your fingers, then your breathing should get more relaxed. Let's go back to the goal of not even being able to hear that you have fingers when you play. A big issue is that we hear fingers when they're not completely coordinated with each other. So it's not even that you're necessarily slapping or gripping, it's that they're not moving exactly together. Fingers are easier to keep completely coordinated when they're relaxed. That's because fingers tend to tense up unequally and then they move unequally. So your less tense fingers will move faster than your more tense fingers. And to make your playing equal, you have to make all your fingers equally relaxed. Still, even if you manage to get all of your fingers equally relaxed, some fingers are just more problematic than others, and that's purely a function of how they work on the flute tube. Oh man, again? I hope you're excited because we've finally come to the point in the video where we get to talk about the three little devils. The three little devils are your three most problematic fingers. 3 out of the 9 give you more trouble than any of the others. We're calling it 9 because we mentioned that it's very important to place this thumb, but once you've placed your right hand thumb, it's like an anchor, it never moves. So out of your other 9 fingers, 3 of them are little devils. And I want to do what they do in chess videos now, which is I want you to think through those 9 fingers and think about which 3 are the most problematic for you. So pause the video and don't restart until you've decided which 3 you think might be the 3 little devils. All right, are you ready for the big reveal? Have you thought through your 3 little devils? Here we go. I know, more finger puppets. But there are very logical reasons behind all of these fingers. And that's one reason I really like these 3 little devils. It's not just Michel Debost's least favorite fingers. There are really good reasons. If you look at which fingers they are, you've got these 2 pinkies. And of course, these fingers are really weak and they don't have as much power as the other fingers, but also they move to open a lever while all your other fingers push to close a key. So say that you're going from A flat to E, you need to close these keys and you need to close this key at the same time, but by opposite motion. You're pushing down with these and you're lifting with this, and these keys and this key have to move at exactly the same time. You have the same thing with this other pinky. Say you're going F to D, then you need to push these down to close them, and you need to lift this off so that this key closes at exactly the same time, like that. The third little devil is this first finger, and just like all these other fingers, it pushes to close a key, but the difference is you're often moving this little devil in opposite motion from your other fingers. So say you're going from an F to an E in the middle octave in the staff, you push down and close these keys, and you lift and open this key, and that has to happen at the same time, and this little devil's involved as well. There are also lots of high register issues because a lot of notes up in the high register don't have this finger down. But this finger is especially bad for the D and the E flat in the staff. This is my bane as a teacher. I always have to tell students to lift this finger up for that D and that E flat. So make a goal that you will never force your teacher to keep saying, lift this finger, lift this finger. And I'll play something in this video to show how this finger is so often going in opposite motion from the other fingers. Now here's why it's useful to know about these three little devils. When your fingers are uncoordinated, you want to know why. You don't want to just say, shoot, for some reason this run isn't happening, and keep blindly trying over and over again to get it to work. You want to figure out which finger or which fingers are causing you the trouble. If you can't tell, give these three fingers extra attention. That's your pinkies and your left hand index finger. It will most likely be one of these three that's not quite coordinated. Once you can tell which finger isn't exactly in sync with the others, it's usually surprisingly not too hard to give that finger some extra attention and get it to cooperate with the other fingers. What do you think? Do you agree with Michel Debost's three little devils? I might call this thumb a fourth little devil actually, because it's so hard to find where to put it. But once you do find the placement for that thumb, it's no problem. It doesn't give you trouble. It's just finding it in the first place. Do you have a fourth little devil? If you have different ideas, you could put them in the comments. And while you're at it, you could go ahead and like this video. Now the big question is, what should you practice to train yourself to stay relaxed and coordinated and even with your finger technique? And the answer is really easy. It's scales and tone studies. Surprise! We want you to be able to play those in your sleep so that you can focus on anything at all that you want to improve. And in this case, we're trying to improve finger technique and staying as relaxed as possible to aid your finger technique. But now we have a big cliffhanger at the end of this episode, and here's what it is. Next episode, I'll give you some ideas of really great tone and technique books to help you focus on things like basic finger technique in case you need some new things like that to practice. But you'll just have to wait until next week to learn what those are. Now, if you really feel anxious to get that information as soon as possible, subscribe to this channel so that you'll be notified as soon as our next episode is released. And in the meantime, practice the technique exercises you already have and be really aware and careful about your finger technique. Make us believe that you don't even have fingers.